Hello everyone and welcome to the Tank Club. Today we're going to be looking at some new gear on the Ascending Tide PTS. This is week 1. Just remember that some of these gear sets may change as we get through the PTS cycle a bit longer. But as of week 1, these are some fantastic tank gear sets. So we are going to be looking at a couple of different things. We're going to be looking at 2 monster sets and 1 5-piece gear set. And we're going to tell you everything you need to know about them. So let's go. So the first gear set we're going to be looking at is a 5-piece gear set from Shipwright's Regret. This is the Ascending Tide set, the heavy armor set. And this set is a very, very nice looking set for tanks in many, many different situations. So the 2-item bonus is 1,206 max health. The 3-item bonus, 1,096 max stamina. 4 items is 1,206 max health again. And then for the 5 items, when you block, you gain flowing water for 10 seconds, causing your next bash attack to deal magic damage to up to 6 enemies in a 10-meter line, and apply major vulnerability for 10 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 10%. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds, and the damage scales off your max health. So quite a lot to chew into there. So first of all, we've got to block an attack from the enemy, and that's going to give us a flowing water buff that will last for 10 seconds. Now, anytime within that 10 seconds, we can bash the enemy, which is going to cause magic damage to the enemy and surrounding enemies that are in a 10-meter line, and it's going to cause that damage, but it's also going to apply major vulnerability for 10 seconds. Major vulnerability is the debuff that gets applied by the Colossus ultimate by the Necromancer. And so we're able to now apply this by bashing with a gear set. Now if we consider that this effect can occur once every 15 seconds and it's got a 10-second uptime, what this means is we're able to get a 66% uptime. So it's active for 10 seconds and then you're not able to get it for 5 seconds and then you can activate it again after the 5 seconds. However, you can time this to have a 20 seconds of back-to-back major vulnerability. So for example, when you get the flowing water buff, you can wait 5 seconds until you bash the enemy. And then you won't have a downtime. So as soon as you reach that 15 seconds, you've got the buff back again and you're able to use it again to provide 20 seconds of back-to-back major vulnerability. So you can time it to get the major vulnerability buff over a longer back-to-back duration period. So we're going to test this gear set out. It's got quite a nice looking visual to it. It's got quite a nice animation. It's a water flowing animation, and it looks nice. So I'm just going to show you kind of how it works and what it looks like and how you can see the debuff and stuff on your bar. So if we look, first of all, if we attack this crab just here, when we block, as you can see there above my health bar, that is the flowing water buff. Now, you've got 10 seconds to then bash the enemy to apply the debuff. And then you can see the pink beam coming from those ads. That is the major vulnerability debuff being applied to them. Now, as you can see, the debuff's appeared again, and this is still active, so I can bash them again. And we've got 20 seconds of back-to-back uptime there of the major vulnerability. And as you can see, like, the enemies were side by side, and we were still able to apply that to them quite easily. Well, I'm going to show you quickly on an ad pull with quite a lot of enemies. As you can see, look, they're not in a line. We can bash them, and it applies. You can see the flow of water. We'll bring them over here so we can see it again. So I'm going to bring these over here, and I'm going to show you how it works. Look, so we've got them. We've got the debuff, and it just does a gust of water in that direction. A flow of water goes in that direction, and we're able to do that. So it's not quite just in a line. It's a bit better than just in a line. We can hit enemies to the side a little bit. It's quite wide. It's quite a wide area. It's kind of similar to Alcon in a way, where when you use a synergy looking in the direction, you're able to hit a number of enemies in front of you in kind of an area. It's got a similar width to Blockade. So when we put down Blockade, as you can see, it's quite a wide area. It covers like a width quite wide to the side. It's similar in width to that. It's not quite as long as Blockade, because it's only 10 meters, so it only comes to about this area. So it's like a box area about this big. So quite a large area that we can cover. There is another gear set that we can use that is going to benefit this, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the strength of this gear set for me is the fact that it means in those kind of earlier, those beginner groups, those newer groups, especially for trials, where you don't have any necros or you have very few necromancers in the group, now the main tank, most likely, is going to be able to run this gear set. So combining this with Yolnahkrin on a main tank is probably going to be the most efficient way to deal with it. And the reason why is because you have to take a hit and then you have to proc it on the main target, which is typically not something that an off-tank would potentially be doing. But as a main tank, when we look at the gear sets that main tank use currently, there are very few really strong main tank sets. So we currently have Yolnahkrin, and Yolnahkrin's not going to go away because it's such an easy set with such a good buff. When you look at the second set, we've got Worm Cult, which is a good set, provides a DPS increase, and it provides sustain for your group. However, a lot of groups don't need it, and sustain is in a very good place, generally, for the majority of groups. So this brings in the option now to provide a damage buff from the tank on the main tank role, and we're going to probably drop a sustain set to run it, but it's going to be very strong. Like I say, any group with no necros or very few necros, this is going to provide a 66% uptime if you proc it on cooldown just by having a tank wear it. So that is really, really efficient and really good for doing that. You've also got the options of, in higher tier groups, potentially running this gear set instead of necros using a Colossus. And that's because necromancers could then, instead of using the Colossus, they can use a different damage based ultimate. So if we've got more like Destro ultimates instead of Colossus, then that should provide a little bit more of a damage increase as well. Now with this gear set, you are actually able to obtain a 60 seconds of back-to-back major vulnerability. And that's only if you combine it with one of our other new gear sets. So the Nazaray monster set is the next gear set that we're going to look at in a second. But when you combine Turning Tide with Nazaray, if you time it correctly, then you can actually get 60 seconds of back-to-back major vulnerability, which is just absolutely crazy. With no downtime. 60 seconds with no downtime by combining those two pieces of gear together. Now, in terms of dungeons, I am kind of wondering, it's difficult to judge this because in dungeon groups, the ability of a dungeon group and the DPS of a dungeon group is more about the individual player's ability. If people can pass really well, then in a dungeon they're going to pass really well, no matter really what the tank gear is that's being used. But in some situations, is it going to be better to provide like Powerful Assault and Olorim and the Spulder of Ruin, or is it going to be better now to run this set on a boss fight? I don't think on ad pulls, maybe, but on boss fights, if you're able to combine Nazaray, the Nazaray Ultimate, with 500 ultimates stored, along with Turning Tide, and then getting that 60-second major vulnerability, if you've got no Necro in your dungeon group, for example, that's probably going to be a really strong option as well. So we've got this option for trials and for dungeons now. I do think that this could be useful in dungeons, for sure. But we just need to figure out like what the difference is in different damage sources and how this is going to impact it. Okay, on to our next gear set. It's the monster set from Shipwright's Regret. So we've got the monster set and a 5-piece set that are both going to be really good from this particular dungeon. And what this is going to do, so the one piece is going to be 1,206 max health. The 2-piece is going to be, when you use an ultimate ability, the closest 6 enemies within 12 meters have all of their damage over time, the major debuffs and the minor debuffs that are being applied to those enemies, extended by 1 second per 25 ultimates spent. This effect will not apply to damage, beams or damage tethers, and this effect can occur once every 20 seconds per target. Anything that's being applied to the enemy. So for example, we've got Jorvald's Guidance, which increases the duration of buffs, so group buffs, to our allies, and this is going to increase the duration of debuffs and damage over time to our enemies. So we've got like sets that do the opposite thing to buff the group in different ways. Now, the reason why I think this is going to be extremely strong is obviously most damage dealers are using some kind of damage over time ability. So when you use your ultimate while wearing this monster set, you're going to increase the damage over time that's being applied to that particular enemy. Now, the reason why I said this is strong when combined with the Turning Tide set is because the Turning Tide set includes the major debuff, Major Vulnerability. So Major Vulnerability is an enemy debuff, and we're able to extend the duration. So for example, if we use our ultimate when it's at 500 and we use a Warhorn, and then we bash the enemy first to proc Turning Tide, then we use our Horn with 500 ult stored up, we get an absolutely insane amount of duration on the Major Vulnerability, and we get our Warhorn as well. So it's like having the option of a Sax Necro without using a Necro or Sax Champion. We're able to kind of get that now by using Turning Tide to kind of bring that in with the Nazaray's Mask, and we're able to get a much bigger uptime of those kind of things. Now, obviously, when you're in a trial group, this is going to be extremely valuable, because in a trial group, you've got a lot of minor debuffs and a lot of major debuffs and a lot of damage over time. When you've got 12 people attacking one boss, that is a lot of different minor and major debuffs that are being applied. That's a lot of damage over time that's being applied. So this should provide an absolutely huge DPS increase to a group based on the increase of those things. And what it means is, as well, is like for a damage dealer, if you apply a dot and then the tank, for example, uses a Horn with a lot of banked up ultimate, then their damage over time abilities are increased in duration, which means they can spend more time using their spammable attacks or more time refreshing other skills, and they don't need to refresh their dots because they're already being extended thanks to the use of this monster set. So it means they can use more spammable attacks and other things like that. So this, for me, is going to be a massive like monster set that we need to use, especially for trials. Dungeons, maybe. It probably depends what things you're using. But you've got to remember, in a dungeon, you've only got 2 damage dealers. So the damage over times that are being applied to an enemy is not going to be that much. The major and minor debuffs, there are very few, because you've only got a tank and a healer. Sometimes you don't even have a healer, so it's just the tank pretty much with their major and minor debuffs. There might be 1 or 2 debuffs coming in from the damage dealers, but there's very few major minor debuffs and damage over time being applied in a dungeon. So is this going to compete with the Spulder of Ruin? I'm not really sure if it will provide a better damage increase than the Spulder of Ruin. I would say it'll definitely, obviously, in terms of trials, this is going to provide a bigger DPS increase than Encratis. So from a main tank perspective, I would say Encratis probably is something that could be dropped, because it only provides a 0.5 to 1% damage increase to the majority of players, because it only boosts fire damage. This is going to work in Stamina, Magicka, mixed groups. It's going to increase a lot more stuff, and obviously with the major and minor debuff increases as well. I do think that Nazaray is going to provide a bigger DPS increase than Encratis. You only get 500 to 1k more DPS. It's only when you've got multiple Dragon Knights in your group that Encratis becomes extremely valuable, because they're getting about a 3k DPS increase from Encratis. Whereas this is probably going to improve DPS by quite a lot more than that, just by the fact that you can extend Major Vulnerability, you can extend all of those major minor debuffs, extending all dots that aren't like damage beams or damage tethers. So I would say this is going to be a replacement for Encratis. Maybe Encratis will go onto the off-tank or a different support role. Who knows? We'll have to kind of see what happens later down the line. Obviously, like I've said already, these things may change because these gear sets are very, very strong. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here is just how strong the Nazaray monster set is when timed with certain debuffs and stuff like that. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to increase the duration of the Turning Tide set. So we're going to get Major Vulnerability for 60 seconds thanks to the Nazaray set combined with 500 ultimate. So here we go. So when we go into a fight, you need to block the enemy. That's going to apply the Turning Tide buff. And then we're going to wait 5 seconds. And then we're going to bash to activate it. And then we're going to get the buff back again before it runs out. So it's about to run out. And it's procced again. We're bashed. And then we use a Horn. And then look at that. It goes up to 28 seconds now of the Major Vulnerability. So now we're going to wait it out until we get the Turning Tide buff again. So we've got a long duration here. We're going to block now because we want to try and get it again. And we get it and we bash to give it the duration again. Now, we've already had 40 seconds. This is up to 50 seconds now. And it's going to come back any second. And there we go. Again, 60 seconds of major vulnerability. There was a few little gaps there just because the boss was hitting me quite slow. So it doesn't hit fast enough to get it specifically on the second. But as you can see there, the strength of this gear set, when you combine it with an ultimate, when you combine Nazaray with an ultimate, it extends those durations and it's really fantastic. The Turning Tide, as you can see, when you bash the enemy, you can see it sends out a flow of water and it's nice and easy. And you can get 20 seconds back to back just by timing it. So, as I mentioned before, you can just wait. When you get the buff, obviously you can see the timing at 8, 7, 6. You cast it on 5. And now, you're going to get it back with it's still active on the boss. So as you can see, it's on the boss still there. It's about to run out. 3, 2, 1. It's ending now. And we've got it back again. And we can activate it. So we can get, without fail, 20 seconds, no problem, just by delaying the bash by 5 seconds. And that means we can just have that consistent 20 seconds every time. And then a 5-second downtime. And it just works really, really nicely. Like I say, if you combine it with an ultimate, you can combine it with an ultimate. We use Nazaray's. Even on 300 ultimate there, we were able to get it to 21 seconds. So we've increased the duration of it to 21 seconds. And now we should be able to get it back. We should be able to get the Turning Tide buff back on our bar before the end of the debuff on the boss. So we're down to the last few seconds on the boss. We can try and proc it. We've got it there. So even still now, we're able to get over 30, 40 seconds of back-to-back buff, even without full ultimate. Just with 300 ultimate, just with Nazaray's, just with Turning Tide, we had 330 ultimate. We extended the duration to 21 seconds, and we're able to dish out, by timing it, a really lengthy debuff of 30, 40 seconds right there. Okay, and finally, we've got the final monster set, which is a new monster set that comes from the Imperial City. This is the Nunatak Set, and this is likely not to be used, but it seems like it could be an option. So Nunatak's, it's going to be a one piece that provides 1,487 armor, and then on the 2-piece, on dealing frost damage, you create a frozen area under the target for 6 seconds. Enemies in the area take frost damage and gain a stack of Chilling Bite, which applies a 25% snare for 4 seconds. On gaining 4 stacks of the Chilling Bite, the enemy becomes immobilized and gains Major Brittle for 4 seconds, and this causes the target to take 20% increased critical damage. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds, and the damage scales off the highest of your weapon or spell damage. It doesn't come across as being extremely useful, because it's 4 seconds of Major Brittle. So this is the first time we've ever seen Major Brittle in the game. And this is increasing damage that enemies take. Increased critical damage taken by 20%. The questions that we've got really are, with the crit cap, is this needed? I don't think it really is. The reason I'm highlighting this is because as a tank, you're going to provide frost damage. Potentially, if you timed everything perfectly, so let's say you've got somebody using this monster set, you'd have to time it where they use and proc this monster set at a similar time that somebody also uses the Nazaray monster set to extend the duration of the Major Brittle. So it would take quite a lot of management to get it active a lot of the time. Obviously it's only 4 seconds and then it's got 15 seconds of downtime. You can only create this effect once every 15 seconds. So unless you've got multiple people using it, it's going to be very difficult. You can't have multiple people use Nazaray because this particular gear set can only occur once every 20 seconds per target. So you can't really have multiple people using Nazaray to extend the duration, but you can have multiple people using Nunatak's to get the increased duration of the Major Brittle, but it doesn't really seem worth it. So I'm highlighting this monster set, but I don't think it's going to be that useful for PvE because it's just going to take too much to manage the uptime. Now if we just show you what this looks like, so what we have to do is we go into a fight, we put down some frost damage and it creates this huge kind of ice thing on the floor. Once the enemies are mobilized, they get Major Brittle applied to them. The Major Brittle. They don't get Major Brittle, it appears, unless they become immobilized. So there's Major Brittle on the immobilized enemies. If they didn't get immobilized, they don't get the debuff applied to them, is what it appears to be. So that is what it looks like to proc the Nunatak's monster set. So we're just here with a boss, and I'm just going to quickly show you the Nunatak monster set again to see if it procs on a boss. So we have to go in and we cause some frost damage, and here is the area. Quite a big area. We've got to get Major Brittle once it ends. Because the enemy doesn't get immobilized, as you can see there is no Major Brittle. You can see underneath the boss's health there, it didn't apply any Major Brittle. So that does not work on bosses. So that diminishes the use of this even further. Maybe for ad pulls, if like, it could potentially be something you use in an ad pull, because it's able to provide that for a short burst. And ad pulls are generally short burst fights. So maybe it could be an option for that, but other than that, obviously it doesn't work on bosses, so it's not that useful. So that, guys, is the new monster sets coming along with the Ascending Tide Dungeon DLC, and that's going to be out very, very soon in a couple of weeks. We've just got a few weeks of PTS, and then we'll have the release of this DLC. Hope you found this video interesting, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.